a trusted voice of truth and light.
God gave me a gift. I shovel well. I shovel very well.
And a rally point for those who've accepted the reality that they are not sheep.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. So glad you could join us today. This is a program dedicated to people who understand that freedom is not something you ask for from someone in authority. It's not even really something that you fight for, tooth and nail. It's something that you claim as an inherent part of who you are. By the way, tip of the hat to my friend Kurt Mercadante for reminding me of this. Yeah, if you are someone who really values your freedom, you have found a place where you will find encouragement and sustenance for your soul, as well as a little friendly kick in the seat of the pants every so often to remind you that you got to claim it, you got to use it, you got to exercise it before you can really claim it as your own, or before you can say that it's yours. Our show is brought to you by LifesavingFood.com, the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage, also HSL Ammo, Sewing and Quilting Center, and MonticelloCollege.org. So I want to start with something that this caught my eye the other day. I shared this on Facebook, but here's an example of someone who understands what it is to be a free individual. And this is a story from the BBC. The headline says, "Man drove without license for more than 70 years." A man stopped by police told officers he'd been driving with no license or insurance for more than 70 years. While on patrol, police pulled over the man near Tesco Extra in Bulwell, Nottingham on Wednesday. Officers said the driver, born in 1938, told them he had been driving with no license or insurance since he was 12 and had never been stopped by police. Now, when I read that story, my first thought was, I have just found a new hero. And, 70 years, this guy... And of course, this did bring out some concerns. And I know there are those who probably right now are having the knee-jerk reaction, hey, the rest of us are playing by the rules. Why didn't he play by the rules? And at least one commenter on Facebook said, well, that's all fine and dandy, but people need to have insurance. I mean, what if something had happened? And they immediately jumped to the hypotheticals. But I think that 70-year clean driving record, never having been stopped by police since he was 12 years of age, I think that speaks pretty well for the guy's driving ability. And I know that there are those who are wringing their hands. Oh, the taxes, the fees, the regulation that this man avoided over 70 years. I mean, forgive me, maybe I'm totally wrong for thinking this, but that guy sounds like a model of what a free man is like. He didn't draw attention of the state, attention of the state for 7 decades. That's pretty good. I mean, I got to give the man props. So, what does that mean for you and me? Well, we've got our work cut out for us. If you want to be a free individual, you are living in a time where freedom is under one of the most sustained attacks that it's been under for quite some time. I mean, there have always been forces working against it, chipping away at it, and I don't think that ever really stops. But what we have seen in the last couple of years has been, I believe, unprecedented. Not only in how ferociously it's gone after our freedoms, but in how widespread it is. This is a worldwide thing. So I hope to offer you a couple of things today that will bolster your willingness and your desire to live as a free individual, not by begging permission from those who think that they rule you, but simply by acting like a free man or woman and going about your life as best you can. Now, there's risk, okay? We have to understand there is always going to be risk in life. And the coronavirus, scary as it may be, is one of those risks. But rather than trying to eliminate all risk from our lives, we've got to learn how to live with those risks, how to work around those risks. It's taken way too long, but the truth is finally becoming almost impossible to deny. There are some, dead enders, kind of like Saddam Hussein's regime, there are no true reports of tanks in Baghdad, even as the capital of Iraq was falling. But the truth about lockdowns, particularly, is beginning to come out. And from a public health standpoint, lockdowns not only weren't necessary, but they also imposed enormous economic and societal costs as well. And there's a new study out from Johns Hopkins that confirms what so many people were saying over the last couple of years. Let me share a couple of excerpts with you. This is an article by Steve Watson out of Summit News. A new study out of the renowned Johns Hopkins University has concluded that global lockdowns had a much more detrimental impact on society than they have produced any benefit, with researchers urging that they are ill-founded and should be rejected as a pandemic policy instrument. Now, the study was authored by Jonas Herby, special advisor at the Center for Political Studies in Copenhagen, Denmark, also Lars Junong, professor emeritus in economics at Lund University in Sweden, and Stephen H. Hankey, a professor of applied economics and founder and co-director of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Applied Economics, Global Health, and the Study of Business Enterprise. Now, the authors wrote, while this meta-analysis concludes that lockdowns have had little to no public health effects, they have imposed enormous economic and social costs where they've been adopted. The focus of the study, according to the authors, was to determine whether there is empirical evidence to support the belief that lockdowns reduce COVID-19 mortality. The researchers defined lockdowns as any government mandate that directly restrict people's possibilities, such as policies that limit internal movement, close schools and businesses, and ban international travel. And the researchers further noted that to answer our question, we focused on studies that examined the actual impact of lockdowns on COVID-19 mortality rates based on registered cross-sectionality mortality data and a counterfactual difference approach. So, in other words, if you don't speak statistic jargon, and I don't, did lockdowns reduce COVID deaths? That's the question that's at stake here. And the answer is, or the conclusion is, no. The study says lockdowns have had little to no effect on COVID-19 mortality. More specifically, stringency index studies find that lockdowns in Europe and the United States only reduced COVID-19 mortality by 0.2% on average. It adds shelter-in-place orders were also ineffective, only reducing COVID-19 mortality by 2.9% on average. Further noting, specific non-pharmaceutical intervention studies also find no broad-based evidence of noticeable effects on COVID-19 mortality. In other words, lockdowns don't do anything to save people from COVID. The authors concluded our meta-analysis fails to confirm that lockdowns have had a large, significant effect on mortality rates. Now, in a further analysis of lockdown versus no lockdown, face masks, closing non-essential businesses, border closures, school closures, and limiting gatherings, the study also found no broad-based evidence of noticeable effects on COVID-19 mortality. Now, these findings bolster a host of previous scientific findings that all conclude lockdowns are ineffective instruments of virus control and actually have caused more damage to people's health and well-being. Stanford University professor of medicine Jay Bhattacharya noted last year that in the years to come, lockdowns will be looked back upon as the most catastrophically harmful policy in all of history. The epidemiologist adding, every single poor person on the face of the earth has faced some harm, sometimes catastrophic harm, from this lockdown policy. Adding that we will be counting the catastrophic health and psychological harms imposed on nearly every poor person on the face of the earth for a generation. I don't think he's prone to hyperbole. A peer-reviewed study by Stanford researchers found that mandatory lockdowns do not provide more benefits to stopping the spread of COVID-19 than voluntary measures like social distancing. So I think the takeaway here is the researchers found no clear, significant, beneficial effect of more restrictive measures on case growth in any country. And I think it probably, needs to be reiterated here. The effects of the lockdown have been devastating. Cancer charities in the UK have been warning there's a crisis underway. Huge numbers of people either not receiving referrals or receiving treatment because they were told, stay at home, don't burden the health system. This is serious stuff. I'll have a link to this in the show notes. You can check it out for yourself. Plenty of hyperlinks within to the studies and to the evidence that backs this up. And I'm really trying my best not to sound like, I'm thirsting for vengeance here, but But I got to ask the question, the people who pushed lockdowns in the face of all evidence to the contrary, who say we had no choice but to do this, these people need to be held accountable. They need to be removed from power, preferably voluntarily. If they had an ounce of decency, if they had any sense of awareness, they would resign. But I think that it's also within the realm of possibility. They should be sitting in court, explaining themselves and facing potential criminal liability for the decisions they made that have been so devastating to so many other people. I know that sounds harsh, but I think that justice, in its truest sense, would require that kind of accountability.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Our program is brought to you by great sponsors like lifesavingfood.com. Now, you don't have to really even be into food storage to recognize the advantage of having the equivalent of a small grocery store tucked away somewhere inside your dwelling. It's peace of mind when you know that, okay, so there's a big storm coming. This is true for a lot of the United States right now. They just got hit by a massive winter storm, including snow and ice and all the things that come along with a massive winter storm. And, typically there's what's called the French toast effect. People run out, they stock up on milk and bread and eggs, things that they're going to need to get them through the next few days or the next couple of weeks. Well, if you have a food storage program in place, especially if you buy good quality food storage, such as the product sold by lifesavingfood.com, you've got food with a 25-year shelf life. Put it aside for a rainy day or a snowy day, as the case may be, and rest easy that you've done your part. You have stores to draw upon in a time of need. And best of all, my friend Kendall Whiting will make it worth your while with a 20% discount, no sales tax, and free delivery. There's a link in the show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. Take a look, see if there's something you need, and if you get it, be sure to let him know that you heard about it here. So I'm hearing a lot of calls for people to get boosted for their own good. I think one of the most ironic is Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who mysteriously was exposed to COVID and then apparently tested positive for COVID, and still urged everybody, follow the health guidelines, get boosted, get vaccinated. Well, here's an urging to get a booster that I think I'm going to actually act upon, and that is Jeff Minnick from intellectualtakeout.org urging, take a Liberty booster. Now, he says, recently I was flipping through A Child's History of the World by Virgil Hillier. And he says, I never used this classic textbook with my own children or my students, and now he says I regret that oversight. Hillier writes well and simply about the past, and sometimes with a wry sense of humor, as evidenced by these lines, measles and mumps are very catching, so are revolutions. Now, Jeff Minnick says, that little phrase got me thinking about the similarities between our world and Hillier's, as well as the things we can do to prevent catching today's virus of totalitarianism. Now, when Hillier penned the little ditty above, he says mumps and measles were indeed very catching. But it's Hillier's second sentence that really grabbed my attention. Hillier uses these two lines to introduce his chapter on the French Revolution. And he's right. Revolutions can be quite infectious. The French Revolution sparked similar uprisings across Europe during the 19th century, and inspired the revolutionaries who overthrew the government of Tsarist Russia. The Soviet Union fell apart several decades ago, but communism and revolution remain very much alive. And now a new revolution is taking place in the United States of America. Now, it's not a revolution of the proletariat, but one that comes from above, instigated, maybe inflicted is the better word, by some of our elected leaders and bureaucrats, our top military brass, big tech, big business, and a compliant media. They seem intent on transforming our republic. Now, Jeff Minnick says, today we treat many diseases with vaccines and therapeutics such as vitamin C and D and zinc. Thinking about Hillier's revolutions in diseases and our present crisis, he says, it occurred to me that there are several vaccines and therapeutics that we can use to inoculate ourselves and boost our resistance to totalitarianism in this COVID time. And these are solid suggestions. First one, read literature about liberty. Now he says, I've just finished Against the Tide, the best of Roger Scruton's columns, commentaries, and criticisms. He says, a couple of months earlier, I read Scruton's Culture Counts, Faith and Feeling in a World Besieged. In both volumes, Scruton delivers a rousing defense of tradition and virtue and warns against creeping totalitarianism. In addition, he says, I've also read some of the essays in Remembering the Right, the 2 magazine-length collections put out by Chronicles magazine. Here are many biographies about such conservative stalwarts as Whittaker Chambers, Alfred J. Nock, and Richard Weaver. Reading these pieces is a grand reminder of all the thinkers who in the past protested dictatorial government and defended both the American way of life and the transcendent. All such publications are like essential vitamins to help ward off the virus of collectivism. By the way, if you're going to read literature about liberty, too, there's a couple other names I would throw in there for your consideration. Anything by Ezra Taft Benson is going to give you a much better grasp of what the proper limits and proper role of government might be. And anything by Leonard E. Reed will get right to the heart of what it means to live the principles and practices of freedom. Just a suggestion. Second suggestion here from Jeff Minnick. Stop looking at politicians as our saviors. Now, he says, many conservatives speak of the red tide in the November election. Once the Republicans win back the House, they contend, all the wrongs inflicted on the body politic this year will magically vanish. And Jeff Minnick wisely warns, not so fast. The Republicans now in office seem largely ineffectual. Since January 20th, 2021, for example, the current administration has encouraged waves of immigrants to invade our southern border. Along with them have come gangs of criminals and loads of fentanyl, the poisonous drug that claimed its share of more than 100,000 U.S. overdose deaths in the 12 months preceding April 2021. And for most of the Republicans elected to Congress, nary a peep. Number 3, he recommends seek the truth. There is no Democrat or Republican truth. There is only truth. And that medication seems to be in short supply today. Is ivermectin an effective therapeutic for COVID? Is there a valid reason for the United States to go to war in the Ukraine? Are our government schools failing as badly as some believe? Regarding these and so many other issues and events, politics, misinformation, and in some cases, mendacity have thrown a cloak over reality. But Jeff Minnick says truth will win out in the end. Talk to people. Investigate online headlines before taking them at face value. Trust your common sense, and you can discern the truth. Finally, he recommends talk to like-minded friends. Now, this doesn't mean build yourself an echo chamber, but he says, whenever my good friend John and I get together, we inevitably sit down and gripe about politics and culture. John turns the air blue with his language. He says, okay, sometimes I add to that discoloration, but we always end up laughing and claiming to have once again solved our nation's problems. Now, this grousing may seem like an exercise in futility, but he says it relieves stress and helps keep us sane. Never despair, never say die. Remember, we're on the side of liberty. So let's take all these boosters and let's keep fighting the virus. The virus, of course, being totalitarianism. By the way, on that last one, talking to like-minded friends, I'm going to tell you this at the risk of appearing weak and ineffectual in your eyes, but I don't care. I want you to understand that, like anybody else, I struggle sometimes to keep my spirits up and to keep, a positive, gleam in my eye as I'm boldly marching forward. And I have a handful of friends, with whom I'm simpatico. And I feel, this sense of kinship, like we are kindred spirits. Every so often, maybe every other week or so, I get the need to just touch base with them, call them up. We don't need to, visit for hours on the phone, but just even a short 5 or 10 minute conversation does so much to restore my sense of balance and to reassure me that, look, there are people out there who still care. There are still people out there who get it. There are people who are struggling just the same as I am. And I draw strength from it. Now, I understand not everybody has someone that they can turn to. And I don't know what to tell you other than these people are out there. You have people within your circle of influence. And if you can't immediately peg someone, as, well, this is the person I would lean on to help me, restore my spirits or reaffirm, my commitment to the cause of liberty, maybe look around and notice if there are people reaching out to you for some kind of reassurance. Because that's a very distinct possibility. This isn't all, take. You got to be willing to give as well. But let's do our best to support each other and to encourage each other and keep that positive attitude moving forward.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm very happy to welcome my friend Caleb Franz back to the program. Caleb, as you may remember, is one of the hosts of the Profiles in Liberty series, and this is going to be a regular feature, Caleb. We're going to have you on here to talk about history being applied. First of all, for people who are just hearing about Profiles in History for the first time, give us a little bit of a pitch for your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bryan, for having me come back onto the program and do this. This is a lot of fun, and I think this is going to be a great segment moving forward. Essentially, my program, Profiles in Liberty, we are entering our second season, and throughout that program, I endeavor to highlight certain individuals throughout history that I find to be inspiring, or I find to kind of give a certain example about how we can move forward, and they can teach us certain lessons about liberty in our own time here. And some of these individuals you may have heard of. The first episode last season I did was on Thomas Jefferson. This season we're going into individuals like Frederick Douglass and people like Harriet Tubman. But a lot of people, especially in this season, I don't think that many people are aware of, and that makes it very exciting for me personally as a storyteller and as a communicator of these individuals, because these are people who made a serious impact on the course of our history and the course of our nation moving forward. And it's about time that they had their stories shined on and highlighted. So
I think last time we spoke, you were telling me the theme, if there is for this season, is the equalizers.
Yes, that's right. So the first season we had the signers of the Declaration of Independence was the theme of that. We highlighted 8 individuals. And this season is sort of the natural progression of what we did in season 1. And in season 2, the theme is, as you mentioned, the equalizers is what I'm calling them. People who fulfill the promise of 1776. Now, some of these individuals were around before 1776 happened, and the Declaration of Independence happened. But they are still individuals who the heart and the core, even though America wasn't quite there yet at that time, these are people who they blaze the trail to show this country and to show us now and to show America then as well what this country and what this idea of the United States could actually look like one day. And those are the people that we highlight in this season.
This sounds like a great way to understand that. Look, influence begets influence, and we build upon the efforts of those who came before us. And anyway, I'm very happy that you're doing this. Let's talk a little bit about Frederick Douglass, and in particular, I think there was a story you were going to share with us today.
That's right. Yeah. So Frederick Douglass is the individual that I highlight in this first episode, and it's actually. I'm really excited about this episode. It's the largest one that we've done so far, even surpassing that of the Thomas Jefferson episode, which was the largest from the last season, because it is such a rich story of his life. And there's one story in particular that I highlight in the first half of this episode that I do that really, I think, showcases not just him, who he was as a person, but also he was able to sort of blaze a trail and show America a better way forward as we are moving past this heinous institution of slavery that we found ourselves in at the time. and that is whenever he went to meet with his former master, who was on his deathbed, and they were able to finally sort of not necessarily make amends, but Frederick Douglass was able to let go. And that was a powerful instance in his own personal life. And it was something that can kind of teach us something important moving forward as a nation, and our ability to forgive even the most heinous and atrocious actions and deeds. And it shows how important it is for us to heal moving forward. And I think certainly we're in a time where we need a lot of healing in our nation currently, and across the world as tensions are constantly rising. And that's truly going to be the best way forward. A little bit of context. Yeah. So a little bit of context here, and the idea of abolition was something that was immensely popular even leading up to the Civil War, but there was a lot of major concerns with that as well, especially with if it was an absolute abolition or if it was something that, in other words, just overnight without any precondition, no gradual emancipation or anything like that. There's a famous quote from Thomas Jefferson comparing slavery to a wolf and saying that there is no real safe way we can either hold it by its ear or safely let it go. Now, a lot of people, point to that and say he's comparing slaves to animals or something like that, but that's not really what he was saying. He was talking about the complexity of how do we even approach this issue in the first place? And moving forward, a lot of people were highly concerned about the outbreak of a race war because they would see how slave masters would treat their slaves. And they thought, it's very likely that people who were out on the receiving end of that would probably want some form of vengeance. And Frederick Douglass was able to show this country that we can move forward without resorting to that sort of vengeful mentality. And he once he earned his once he claimed his freedom, he was able to he wrote an editorial, an open letter to his former master, saying essentially there would be no roof under which you would be safer than mine. I am your fellow man, but I am not your slave. And that was a powerful instance and a powerful point in American history. And then we fast forward several decades, and he's finally able to meet with and sit down in a room with his former master. And they can just not hold. They really can't hold themselves together. They break down into tears and are full of emotion, just talking about trying to catch up on life and talking about the mistakes that they've made, as well as like the approach of death, and which was coming quickly for both of them. Douglass said that, it wasn't you that I fled from. It was slavery that I fled from. And Thomas Auld was even able to admit that, if I were in your shoes, I would have done the exact same thing that you did, which was a pretty big thing for someone like him specifically to admit, because he was by no means a kind slave master by any stretch of the imagination during Douglass's time. But rather than be at each other's throats up until the bitter end, they were able to finally let go of that conflict and that hatred and move on from it. And then Thomas Auld actually died just 3 years after that happened. And Frederick Douglass was able to finally find some closure between him and his former master.
One of the things as you're describing that pops into my mind is, we think about it, we look back and we have this luxury of hindsight. Well, of course it was wrong. How could they not have seen it was wrong? But slavery, like it or not, it was accepted by a majority of the population. It was considered very mainstream. The people who were abolitionists were out there on the fringes, and it was that way for a long time. And that doesn't mean that everybody who came before us was evil, but clearly they had some blind spots that were very hard to acknowledge. And I think Frederick Douglass, the way you're describing it, was very helpful in helping to illustrate that blind spot without just doing so as a matter of I've got to destroy everything and everyone that was associated with it. This sounds like a story that conveys conscience at work.
It does, yeah. Real conscience. I think that Frederick Douglass himself had a lot of. He had a very vengeful attitude, and he was angry at the institution of slavery, and he was angry that this country was able to put him through so much. But as he grew and as he learned about what the true intentions of the founding fathers was, not to keep people in chains, but to liberate people, and that helped him sort of take apart his own chains, his own personal chains, his emotional chains away from him, and let go of things. And I think that really helped this country move forward in a way that a lot of us don't fully appreciate even today.
Caleb, tell everybody where they can find Profiles in Liberty, and let's get them connected with this excellent podcast.
Yes, so you can find Profiles in Liberty anywhere where you get your podcasts from. For the next 8 weeks, we are going to be going over the equalizers. So I hope that you'll join me on this journey through discovery. And I am also on Twitter at Caleb Franz for those interested.
Okay, and I want you folks to know, if you enjoyed that story, Caleb is going to be joining me every other week. We're going to be highlighting another one of these stories. I think it's a great learning opportunity, and I so appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. This was great.
All right. Again, we're talking with Caleb Franz. He is the host of Profiles in Liberty. I'll have links in the show notes, which you can find at thebryanhydeshow.com. And we'll be back right after these messages.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. A trusted voice of truth and light.
God gave me a gift. I shovel well. I shovel very well.
And a rally point for those who've accepted the reality that they are not sheep.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. This is a gathering place for people who like to revel in wrongthink. And if you're one of those people who at least likes to think for yourself, congratulations. You're a wrong thinker. Now, if you shy away from that label, I want you to know it's a badge of honor to be a wrong thinker, to think clearly and independently in times such as these. Our program is brought to you by great sponsors who make this possible on a daily basis. They include MonticelloCollege.org, SewingAndQuiltingCenter.com, HSLAmmo.com, the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage in St. George, Utah, and LifesavingFood.com. I've been friends with Connor Boyack for quite a while. Connor is the president and founder of Libertas Institute, one of the institutions that I think it's a nonprofit think tank that is making a huge, huge difference in promoting the ideals of liberty. And Connor has some very relevant thoughts on truckers, Joe Rogan, and unacceptable views. This came out in their Tuttle Twins newsletter just recently. Connor starts with, been one heck of a week, hasn't it? He says, for starters, Canadian truckers and their Freedom Convoy have mounted a stunning protest against draconian COVID rules forced by Justin Trudeau and his band of lower government cronies. In fact, so many trucks have joined the ever-growing convoy to the tune of more than 50,000. It broke the world record for the largest truck parade 10 times over. Yeah, they were saying it was like a 45-mile-long procession of trucks. And it wasn't only the truckers protesting, Connor says. Fed-up Canadians lined the highways to greet the convoy, waving signs of support and cheering their countrymen on. And it didn't take long before certain bureaucrats in Nova Scotia decided to outlaw protesting from the side of the road. Yep. You know, in the name of public safety. Wink, wink. Connor says, I have to be honest, watching all of this is a little embarrassing for us Americans. Have we really let ourselves slip so far into complacency? We're getting out-protested by the world's most agreeable people? We're supposed to be the crazy individualists, for crying out loud. Now, he says, in all seriousness, it's been a real bright spot to see thousands of our northern neighbors stand up to their horrifically authoritarian rulers, Just like Australia, Canada's handling of the pandemic has been a pretty great reminder of what's at stake if we forget or stop caring about our individual liberties. Now, lest we forget, Canada and Australia were once free democracies, embracing the Western tradition of representative government and personal liberty. Fast forward to today, and unjabbed Canadians can't even grocery shop without a government babysitter. And he says, don't even get me started on Australian quarantine camps. But as we're seeing right now, these draconian rules have not been without consequences. Apparently, Justin Trudeau didn't want to deal with these consequences because when the convoy hit the capital city of Ottawa, he was nowhere in sight. After claiming he'd been exposed to COVID and needed to quarantine, he took the cowardice a step further and was whisked away to a secret trucker-free location. Now, it's not such an unfamiliar scenario to us Americans, is it? Connor says, while serious problems arise, soaring inflation, prolonged lockdowns, COVID test shortages, tensions on the rise in Russia, to name a few, our president is nowhere to be found. Or rather, his staff is hoping he isn't found. Connor says, I'm guessing they have him right where they want him, squirreled away with an ice cream cone and a coloring book somewhere in the West Wing until they have his teleprompter ready for the next, quote, press conference. And as long as the media keeps sticking to the scripted questions and leading with segments on his new cat, everything will just keep ticking just fine until it won't. Now, he says, eventually we will truly understand what happens when the leader of the free world lies to the public and hides from his job. There are consequences on the horizon. People are fed up with being lied to and taken for stupid. And the more we all make that known, the more the establishment loses its mind. You know how I know? Because a podcast hosted by a Bernie Bro MMA commentator / comedian is becoming the center of global controversy. Crosby, Stills, and Nash are weighing in for Pete's sake, and over what? Evidently, the thought crime of interviewing two prominent healthcare figures with unique perspectives on COVID-19. Now, Connor Boyack says it's pretty unsurprising that Joe Rogan is making a mockery of CNN's ratings. He says, I have a feeling it has something to do with the fact that he doesn't treat his constituency like they're idiots. He interviews all sorts of folks and lets people make up their own minds. Our mainstream media and government could learn a thing or two from him, but they won't. Instead, they'll paint him as a bigot, a white supremacist, and a greedy charlatan spreading dangerous misinformation. Now, the good news, it's not going to work. In fact, it will continue to backfire. We'll see it in this year's elections when people who've been lied to repeatedly by the government and its crony medical establishment enter the privacy of the voting booth. It'll be game over for the Democrats and their COVID regime. And Connor says, let's just hope that when the pendulum swings, it's back to the ideas of liberty. The same ones that brought this nation from a ragtag band of farmers to a global superpower in under 300 years. Now, he says, I'll admit it. Thinking about where our country today is headed can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. We know that the future is in the hands of today's children, and this means ensuring that America's future starts with kitchen tables and bedtime stories. Now, he says, this is why I wrote the Tuttle Twins series, to help parents with the daunting task of raising peaceful protesters, critical thinkers, status quo questioners. We can't afford to fail the next generation when it comes to the ideas that matter. So he says, if you've been on the fence about buying a Tuttle Twins book, this week's been a great reminder of the stakes. Canadian truckers and fearless podcasters are awesome, but we're going to need a whole lot more folks with that kind of spit in the years to come. So he says, join me and the Tuttle Twins team in ensuring liberty survives another generation. Keep on trucking. Now, I know there are some who would be tempted to dismiss this. Oh, yeah, no, Connor's just trying to sell more books. Well, I've worked alongside this guy. And I want you to understand that I don't think there is anybody I know who is a harder worker and more dedicated and more selfless in how he works than Mr. Boyack. And the Tuttle Twins books are a brilliant way not just to get kids exposed to the principles and practices of liberty, the ideas of what a free market is and how it works, and the basics of free market economics, but it's great for adults too. Parents, grandparents, these are stories that are broken down and often borrowing from classic stories like Leonard Read's I Pencil essay into concepts that young minds can get around. And the whole thinking here is that it's so much easier to teach kids these principles when they're young than it is to try to counteract misconceptions that we were taught all of our lives, and as adults, we have a very difficult time overcoming. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like we're all stuck in the mud here, but, you know, it's hard for us to change our minds. It's hard to unlearn bad habits. If I could use this analogy, maybe some dads will understand this. When I first started to teach my daughters how to shoot a .22 rifle, I was astonished at how quickly they picked up on shooting. And they're very good shots. I mean, they are like impressively good. Ridiculously good, to the point that I was like, okay, that's enough. Put it down. You're making me look bad. Okay, I'm only half kidding. But one of the reasons why they were so good is because they had fewer bad habits to unlearn. I struggled a lot more learning how to be a good shot than they did because I had picked up a lot of habits over the years. Okay, now let's apply that to liberty and to understanding the world around us. This isn't about turning your kids into radicals. This isn't about turning your kids into the kind of people who, you know, mask their faces and dress in black and burn businesses and beat people and, you know, chant slogans and want to fight everybody who doesn't think exactly like them. That sounds more like Marxism. This is a much better approach. This is an approach that is based in morality as well as truth and timeless principles that have actually stood the test of time. And I got to apologize if this sounds like, wow, Brian, this is just like one big infomercial for the Tuttle twins. Well, it is an infomercial of sorts, but it's more for the cause of freedom. The Tuttle twins are just one of those tools with which you can put a better understanding of the principles and practices of freedom in the hands, in the minds, in the hearts of the ones who have the heavy lifting to do in the days ahead, and that would be our kids. It's a great time to start. I'll have a link to Connor's email in the show notes. We'll be back in just a few moments. Please stay with us.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.